Hello friends, I am Chevy. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic. Everything here is pretty darn good. It's Friday. Lots of rain. School, they actually called school today because we haven't had snow days, so they're just giving the kids a day off. I actually got two more questions this week from viewers, and I'm really liking this. So thank you everybody who's submitted questions. We might be able to answer both of these today, but I'm going to start with Kirioni, who's been around for a long time. I recognize the screen name. It's been a while. But they said, what's one skill you think all 8-year-olds should have? My son, who is now 8, has watched with me on and off since as long as he can remember, really. He's into making things out of cardboard and building things for his classroom. I'd love your take on skills to pass on to kids. I grew up in a thrifty household. We'll call it thrifty. My dad was a school teacher. My mom worked odd jobs. So we weren't rife with cash. We couldn't afford to pay people to do all the various things that my parents wanted to do. They bought a small 3-bedroom ranch and wanted to fix it and add things and do things to it. And my dad did all of that work. He also drove antique vehicles that needed a lot of repair, and so he spent a lot of his summer and winter time off working on his vehicles. So, I mean, from a very young age, I was learning how to make and create and do. My mom sewed my costumes for classes and, all that stuff. So I learned how to sew, I learned how to build, I learned how to fix cars, all from a very early age. And I can say, through all of the things that I have learned how to create in my life, the skills that are transposable between all of them are correcting your mistakes. Duh. I think that's you have to learn that. Maybe that's not the skill. Maybe the skill is learning that mistakes are okay and how to fix them, because they're just a part of being human, right? Everything. From your job to cooking to cleaning, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Just learn how to fix it. No big deal. But as far as hard tactile skills go, I like to build things. That's what I really enjoyed. And my dad brought home lots of scraps of lumber like this. This is something I'm using to help build my workbench, but lots of little pieces of 2x4s, construction lumber, little pieces of plywood. At his school where he taught, they built a house every year and then sold it. And so he would bring home scraps and offcuts that they would let him have. We would have buckets of nails, framing nails. And so I learned at an early age how to hammer a nail by hand with a hammer. No nail guns. I learned how to use a drill, and I learned how to use a screwdriver with screws. We didn't have cordless at that time. I do remember when the first cordless screwdriver it was this Makita screwdriver that was like this long. It was a hilarious looking thing. But so learning how to attach pieces of wood with a hammer and nails was huge for me. And I was doing that at 8 years old. I don't know that every kid has a mentor like that, but I was doing that at 8 years old, which meant that from 8 until my teens, I was building things, fantastical things. I built a lot of what I called go-karts, but they were really just wooden frames with lawnmower wheels on them and a rope steering system, and I would ride them down the hill at my parents' house. I built a lot of what I called tree houses, which were really just me nailing boards into trees and building platforms for me to climb up into and sit on. Those were skills that I learned at a very early age. Cutting wood with a handsaw. I was not allowed to use power tools other than the power drill and the jigsaw. So I learned very early how to use a handsaw. My dad taught me with a crosscut saw. I think this is a crosscut. Yeah, with a crosscut saw like this, I learned how to crosscut boards. I don't think we had a rip saw even. I think I ripped with one of these too, which is an extremely difficult thing to do. You will not cut straight that way. My mom taught me how to sew on a sewing machine, how to use patterns and cut fabric and seam allowances. I learned all of that stuff at a very early age. And all of that. So learning all of those things, building extensions on a house, that sort of stuff, pounding nails into trees. I think the thing that I learned the most, and the skill that I think that people need to learn, is how to measure. Just simple measuring. Like, I want a thing that is this big. How do I create that? Because I think that skill, learning that, for instance, I'm making a leg for a workbench, and I know that I want my tabletop is 25 inches wide. I want my base to be 24 inches. And so I have two pieces of 4x4 as legs, and I need to come up with the piece that goes between. How do you figure that out? Well, you could say, well, this is a 4x4, which means it's 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and so you subtract that from 24, which is you're subtracting 7 inches from 24, which leaves you with 17 inches. So this piece needs to be 17 inches long. But the reality is, very, very rarely is real world measurement accurate. It's not. And so what you really need to do is take these two pieces of wood, put them on top of each other, and then measure from there. Because these probably aren't exactly 7 inches. I guarantee you they're not, in fact. They're going to be some weird measurement in between all of that. And so learning how to take those measurements and turn them into the piece that you cut that goes between, that's a skill that works with any kind of making. And it often is what we call relative measuring. Relative measuring is the measuring with real-world objects, not the imaginary measurement of I need a piece that's exactly 12 inches. You're not going to cut a piece that's exactly 12 inches. You're going to cut a piece that's pretty darn close. And if that's okay for your project, great. If you need it to be, have a tolerance of plus or minus 0.02 of an inch, then you're a machinist and you need to go to school for years and years and years to figure out how to make that work. But for real life making, whether it's sewing or woodworking or making doll houses, that sort of stuff, out of cardboard, measuring is the real skill. And I think that what I have found about myself that fascinates me when I watch other people who make is, this is going to be, maybe this is braggadocious, I'm not sure, but I have never used a plan, not in a sense of detailed cut list, these things work like this, pattern for sewing. I think giving your 8-year-old a pile of cardboard and scissors and tape and maybe some glue and some toothpicks and just saying, all right, make something, figure out what you're going to make and let's make it as accurately as we can. That develops a sort of pattern creation that it seems like most people don't have. It feels like, in my opinion, that most people need that detailed plan because they don't know how to assemble a plan on their own. They don't know how to say, I want a bench that's 24 inches wide. Let's figure all these measurements out. And most of it is going to be on the fly. You're going to figure it out as you go. You don't need to sit down beforehand and figure all these measurements out because, like I said earlier, they're going to be wrong. By the time you have your materials in hand, whatever those materials are, and you start assembling things, the measurements are going to be a little off here and there, and that's okay. So learning to take a material and turn it into something without a plan, without not necessarily guidance, but without pictures, without predefined measurements, that's a skill. That's a huge skill, and that's a skill that will take you pretty far, because most things that you're going to create in your life are not going to be exact copies of somebody else's thing. I mean, maybe you are. Maybe your kid's going to turn out to be somebody who just really likes replicating something. Great. For them, maybe it's the infinitesimal details of that particular skill set that interests them. But I think that for the vast majority of people, you're going to be creating things that have different parameters for every iteration of the thing you create, and being able to adjust yourself, your mental view of that object, your mental idea of what that object is going to be, that's a very important skill to develop. Very important skill to develop, in my opinion. Using a plan is fine, especially if you're trying to replicate something. But often just working off the cuff, that's a big deal. So, I think you're already winning. You've given the kid cardboard and tape and scissors and said make something. Excellent. Maybe hopefully, or maybe at this point you've introduced how to be safe with a utility blade. That's going to be a very important skill for any kind of making, and letting the child use it is an important thing to do as well. Not necessarily hovering over them and making them feel nervous about it. Proper knife handling skill is hugely important. I think any kind of knife, whether they're going to be a rock climber or whatever, like any kind of knife, kitchen knives, learning those, not being afraid to let your kid experiment with things that are, quote, dangerous. They are dangerous, and the only way they're going to learn that is by using those tools. I think that's important. I'm not saying let your kid go loose in your shop with a table saw and see what happens. I am saying that give them the freedom to explore the tools in the world that they're in, with guidance, obviously. And maybe even the point of that is to teach them to be afraid. Teach them that this is scary. It should be scary. I'm scared when I turn my table saw on. Every time. I think, is there anything that can hit the blade? Is there something that's going to pinch and cause kickback? Is my clothing going to get in the way? Do I have enough range of motion to do what I need to do? Am I safely away from things? Every time I work at the saw, I'm fearful, and I should be. And if I'm not, there's a problem, right? I think that's an important skill to learn, that you should be afraid of the tools you're using. Or you should have respect, let's say that. So, thank you for the question. I'm really enjoying doing the questioning thing. Jonathan asked me if I have any familial, quote, how did he call it? If I have any family collabs lined up, meaning things that others people want me to do. Not really, aside from finishing this room over here that we've been talking about forever. I do have I have something sitting on my workbench. It's been sitting on my workbench for 2 years that I need to do for a friend. And then M definitely still wants me to build nightstands. That's part of the reason why we're doing this thing. Once I've got this thing done, I'm going to bring her down here and we're going to build the nightstands together. So those are the only real family things I got going on right now. Thank you for being here, as always. Thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming. I love it. Thank you for being here, liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. I hope you have an amazing, amazing weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Today's word you should know to sound smart is propitiate. It's a verb meaning to win over, to gain the approval and admiration of. The life that went on in many of the street's houses seemed to me made up of evasions and negotiations, shifts to save cooking, to save washing and cleaning, devices to propitiate the tongue of gossip. Willa Cather, an American author. Propitiate. Propitiate. There we go. There's a good word. Now I've learned a good word. Propitiate. Gain approval and admiration of.